Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, June 22nd, 2024, and today we're going to be talking about Donald Trump's Get Out the Vote plan, his Get Out the Vote strategy. We otherwise refer to it as GOTV here, an effort that is now going to be combined with Turning Point Action, a conservative group led by Charlie Kirk, the same Charlie Kirk who has been under fire for criticisms surrounding racist comments, different things that have been made through his platform, through his personal capacity, all around has been under scrutiny from the mainstream media, from members of both the left and the right, for some of the more outlandish things that he has said, is now leading Donald Trump's Get Out the Vote efforts in key battleground states, charging the campaign over $100 million. Now, this story has been picked up by quite a few outlets recently talking about Donald Trump's ground game strategy, and it seems here that he's not only relying on support from Turning Point Action, but pretty much is outsourcing almost all of the campaign's major efforts in the final days of the campaign season. Now, the big problem with this is that Turning Point Action is a conservative group with absolutely no track record. In fact, their only major impact on any election was in 2022 when they backed practically all of the wrong candidates in the 2022 Arizona elections. They backed Blake Masters, who went on to lose to Mark Kelly, the incumbent Democrat there, by 5 points. They backed Carrie Lake, the Republican nominee for governor, who went on to lose to then the Secretary of State, Katie Hobbs, in this battleground state. Turning Point Action was responsible for getting out the vote, turning out the base, and ultimately fell flat in a state that they now are taking on full control of for the Donald Trump campaign. Now, I can't help but think that this is a decision that has been made largely because of the change in conservative leadership at the top of the RNC. Donald Trump has a family member who heads the entire Republican Party. The RNC is currently co-chaired by Laura Trump. Now, if you remember Ronna McDaniel, who used to be the Republican chair nationwide, she was a very well-known and very respected figure amongst the mainstream GOP. She decided to step down after months of infighting with people like Charlie Kirk and other members of the more extreme side of the Republican Party that were unwilling to work with her as chair of the RNC. Ronna McDaniel saw this plan from Charlie Kirk and completely looked the other way. She shot it down multiple times and said, "We don't want the Republican group that lost us the Arizona Senate, governor, House elections to run the presidential for Donald Trump." And so Charlie Kirk went to Donald Trump directly and really tried to make Ronna McDaniel feel as if she was a Democratic plant, built out all of these ideas, went on the offense against her very publicly, and amidst all the pressure, decided that she was going to take a step back. And she removed herself out of the equation. And then Donald Trump implanted his family member, Laura Trump, to be now the RNC chair. And guess what? The RNC has now completely adopted the Charlie Kirk plan for what's going to happen this coming November. Now, the big problem with this is a two-sided thing. One part of it is money. One part of it is the amount of money that this Get Out the Vote plan is going to charge the Trump campaign, because it is currently scheduled at $108 million. That's how much this Turning Point Action group plans to spend on it. Another side of it is feeding into this consistent point that we have talked about for months on end now, about the lack of strong political instincts that we have seen, or probably have not seen, from the Trump team over these coming months. We have seen multiple times where Donald Trump himself and those close to him, people like Chris LaSavita, people like Laura Trump, the members of the Trump team that are approaching this election as if it's a done deal, treating it as just something that is just going to, be a cakewalk. There's no chance that Biden wins re-election, and Donald Trump can do practically anything he wants in their eyes and still win the election. But it is a very real reality that that is exactly not the case. The difference in 2016 was that practically no one on the Trump team thought they were going to win. In 2020, they very much did think they were going to win, but the data didn't reaffirm any of those beliefs. Biden was up in every battleground state, and he was doing phenomenally nationwide, and ended up winning nationwide by 5 points, larger than Obama's re-election. But the margins were close. This time around, the numbers affirm that while President Biden may now be up nationwide by 0.3, Donald Trump himself tweeted out that he doesn't believe these metrics. He doesn't believe the Fox News poll, and reiterates multiple times that he's going to win this election. There's no chance that Biden wins, that this is going to be a landslide of epic proportions. I mean, Biden is seeing that Trump is making a play for states Biden is easily going to win this November. States like Virginia and Colorado and, New Jersey, all these random states here where Trump is scheduled or has already spoken at. And again, consistently, the lack of political instincts to spend money Tens of thousands of dollars, first of all, go into the amount of money needed to be spent on these rallies every single time he holds one. And so when you think about the amount of money you're pouring out to hold a rally in Wildwood, New Jersey, the only thing there that we're talking about that is of significance outside of politics, you're talking about a Six Flags and talking about a region that is, close enough to Pennsylvania, close enough to a region of the state that, sure, maybe there are some people coming from Philadelphia, people coming from Pennsylvania to watch this rally. But the point is, why are you spending money in New Jersey? It's the same thing we're starting to see. He's holding a rally in the Bronx. He's not going to do better there, significantly better because of holding the rally there. So the cost and the time that he spends, doing all these things, getting remarks, getting people on stage, all this coordination from the Trump team really amounts to absolutely nothing electorally. And so when they make moves like these, it reaffirms exactly what I've been thinking for quite some time now, that the Donald Trump campaign has a fundamental problem, and it is very much at the top. The people calling the shots don't know how to win an election because he's bringing in the same people that refuse to reflect on the 2020 election at baseline to say, where did we go wrong before? Where can we improve upon? They're under this assumption that where they went wrong was nowhere and Joe Biden stole the election. People like Charlie Kirk, people like Lara Trump at the top are reiterating that. Donald Trump himself seemingly believes that, or maybe doesn't, I don't know, but puts on this, persona or whatever it might be, that this election was stolen. And so there's no real room for improvement for Donald Trump if he isn't approaching this election any differently. And in fact, I genuinely believe is approaching it worse off. And I think you find that in decisions like this one, where you are spending so much money on a get out the vote plan. When you take a look at the recent article from Politico, they talk about how Trump has raised so much cash in the last month that he has erased Biden's cash advantage. For periods of time, Biden was out fundraising Donald Trump by $50 million, $60 million. And so for months, you would see that overall, Biden had by roughly $100 to $150 more million than Donald Trump. Now we're back to equal. Now we're back to Trump raising so much money post-conviction in May, in June, that he is able to use this and pretty much do whatever he wants with it over the next coming months. But there's a caution here. When you talk about where Donald Trump is holding rallies, a lot of the money that he spends is going to be and has been spent on his public appearances, where he's going to campaign, how he's going to get there. A lot of it has been spent on legal fees, and there still are legal fees to pay with those who defended him in court and are ramping up to defend him in future court cases. 1 down, 3 more to go. When you take a look to it beyond that, the biggest thing here is this get out the vote plan from Turning Point Action that I take a huge problem with. If I was looking at it from the Trump perspective, Donald Trump might have matched where Joe Biden is, but both campaigns have just, 100, 200 million on hand and have been spending excessive amounts. But if a campaign get out the vote strategy requires a $108 million buy-in from the Trump campaign, a huge chunk of that fundraised cash is gone in a blip. And I have to look at it, too, from the perspective of Turning Point Action promised the same exact thing to the Arizona GOP and produced absolutely nothing. The 2022 Senate elections in Arizona were just abysmal for the Republican Party. Mark Kelly was supposed to lose based on the polls. Based on history, he only won by 2.4 in 2020. How in the world, in a red wave year, do you end up winning by 5 points? It is a complete and total failure on the Republican Party side. An even bigger failure was the Arizona governor's race. Kari Lake was supposed to win easily. She was leading in the polls. She had been leading forever. Katie Hobbs ran arguably not so strong of a campaign. She might be a governor from a swing state, but she did not run a stellar campaign. She refused to debate Kari Lake. She refused to make multiple public appearances. She looks like she was putting this campaign on the back burner for whatever reason, and yet, she still ended up winning. Why? Because Katie Hobbs was begrudgingly put over the top because Kari Lake was extreme, and the base did not show up and turn out. Turning Point Action backed these candidates from the beginning. They were supposed to deliver on them in November, and it failed miserably. Looking at the 2024 election, what we find is that they are going to be taking over in some very important battleground states. The ground game here, again, has yet to be proven to be effective. And the second most powerful political party in the world, in the country, is now outsourcing some of their battleground state operations to a group here that is doing things for a very high amount. Now, Turning Point as a large, they do Turning Point USA, Turning Point Action, they've been raising money for quite some time. But some Republicans raise that $108 million being put in from the Trump campaign is a grift. They see this as something that is Donald Trump being taken advantage of by people like Charlie Kirk. And arguably, that case could absolutely be made. I mean, if these are things that can be done for a fraction of the cost, why are you bringing in so much money? And Turning Point Action actually has a history of having top executives make far more than what they should be doing on a conservative network that is supposedly solely and only focused on getting out the vote, solely and only focused on spreading the conservative message. The GOTV plan also, with $108 million, extends to just 3 battleground states: Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin. Now, they will have a presence elsewhere, but these are the 3 states that they are primarily focused on and are being trusted with the Donald Trump campaign. These are 3 very important states. Why do you think they came together? Well, they were the closest in the 2020 presidential election, and in fact were the only 3 states that were decided by less than a point in the 2020 presidential election. Had they gone to Donald Trump, they were all won by Biden. Had they gone to Donald Trump, he would have won another 4-year term. To put things into perspective, across these 3 battleground states, 44,000 votes made the difference between Biden and Trump. Nationally, you're talking millions, but across these 3 states, 44,000 votes made all the difference out of 100, 200 million, 100 million votes cast, 150 million votes cast across the country. That is what makes or breaks elections. And when you trust a group like this one, who again has no track record, no substantive, really anything when it comes down to politics, all of it is just vibes and who knows who, that is the problem with politics and is fundamentally the problem for the Trump team. They are surrounding themselves by yes men and people who don't know how to win elections. And I think we would all be looking at this and looking at decisions like these in an autopsy, should the Trump campaign lose, about how an election against a president with just a 39% approval rating failed. How an election and a bid for the White House from the Republican Party in what should be arguably one of the easiest cakewalks to victory when you look at President Biden's numbers. I mean, that is where Republicans should be, but they're failing, and they're failing hard, and they have only the Trump campaign to blame. Donald Trump could drag down House Republicans, could drag down Senate Republicans. There are so many ways that this election can go awry simply because Donald Trump is at the helm of this. And that people like Charlie Kirk, again, people like Charlie Kirk who make comments that they're worried if they have a black pilot and have to question, are they actually credentialed? Are they actually going to be able to fly this plane? I mean, you have people like this associated with Trump at the helm of his campaign, and that's the problem. When the Republican Party is really trying to ramp out efforts to reach minority voters, putting people like this, who come up just short of being considered a white supremacist, that is not who you want leading your efforts, especially in states with very prominent, minority populations. Georgia, the black vote is huge there. Same thing in Wisconsin and Arizona. Latino vote here, huge. These 3 states need someone who has a pulse on the electorate, and that is not Charlie Kirk. That is not Turning Point Action. And when we find, should Donald Trump lose this election, this will be one of the main points in understanding what went wrong. And outsourcing of a huge chunk of your funds, probably a tenth of what the Trump team will raise this entire election, will go straight to Turning Point Action in Arizona, Wisconsin, and Georgia. And it may be all for nothing. This is not a sign of a stable campaign, of a strong campaign, of a smart campaign, because they would research these things more. They would look beyond blind allegiance to people like Charlie Kirk, who may have shown blind allegiance to Donald Trump in 2016 and 2020. But that doesn't matter. Blind allegiance may be one thing for Trump's team, and it clearly, loyalty has very much been everything for the Trump administration, for the Trump team, for the campaign, whatever it might be. Donald Trump and his voters value loyalty above all. But I will say, loyalty doesn't win you elections. Electability does. And making the conscious decision that is right for your campaign, something that could be advised by even people like anyone watching this, anyone who understands why this is a bad move. I mean, there are so many different ways we could look at this and say, hold on a second, you just messed this up. Now it's time to go back. Maybe they're contracted in. Maybe there's a reason why he's sticking with Charlie Kirk. But I genuinely could not give you an answer if I was looking at this from an analytical point of view of what benefit came of this $108 million deal. It really just seems like Turning Point Action just got a huge chunk of cash, and there is nothing the Republican Party can do to combat it. Because the only dissenter in major leadership, Ronna McDaniel, was pushed out by the CEO, the leader of this organization, Charlie Kirk, who has now made himself a top ally of President Trump and his campaign, and is now running some of the most important parts of it, yet with no supervision, no track record, just vibes. And that's the problem for Donald Trump and his campaign. And so we will see come November if the strategy works in Arizona, Wisconsin, and Georgia. But if I was looking at their track record alone, I wouldn't hold my breath. I think we will find that they will show somewhat strong performances just at baseline because of President Trump and potentially some improvements that we have seen since the 2020 election. But if Trump is to win, it will certainly not be on the backs of Turning Point Action. Their track record speaks for itself, and I do think, too, when you take a look at who's running it, you know from the beginning, it's the same problem with the Trump campaign. The problem is at the top, and no one wants to acknowledge it. No one wants to move on or move to somebody else because of all this loyalty, being caught up in this idea that everything needs to be this allegiance to Trump and his team, Trump and his family now, with Laura Trump as the RNC chair. And that could be the own, fault of the Trump team if they end up losing. They could be digging their own grave in this election. I'd be interested to see what happens in Wisconsin, Arizona, and Georgia. Do numbers go up? Do numbers go down? Because based on 2022, again, wouldn't hold my breath. And I also think it's just really fascinating that all of this is being outsourced and not done internally on the Trump campaign side. I think there are problems with that, but for another video, not for right now. Main takeaway, bad move, bad decision financially, electorally, but there's not much else we can expect from a campaign that really hasn't been running itself to max capacity and probably won't be through the election. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.